Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to translate the complex biochemistry of cellular respiration into a really fascinating tour of the body's microscopic economy. Think about it. Every single second of every day, right inside your body, trillions of cells are engaging in this relentless, high-stakes market of energy production and consumption. So today, we're going to look at the exact molecular currency that funds human life, where it's minted, and what happens when those vital supply chains break down.
Here is our roadmap for today's cellular economy tour. We'll start with the cell's energy currency, then tour the ATP production line, see what happens during life without oxygen, look at spending the energy, and finally examine what happens when power grids fail.
So, to really understand life, we have to ask a fundamental question. How does the body actually fuel these immense physical and mental tasks on a microscopic level? Now, it's super easy to just say, well, we get energy from food. But a muscle cell cannot directly use a piece of a sandwich to contract. No way. That food has to be broken down and converted into something much more immediate and highly usable.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, the cell's energy currency.
Meet the physical cache of your biology, ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. It's composed of adenine, a ribose sugar, and 3 phosphate groups. Now, because ATP only stores a very limited amount of immediately available energy, your cells have to continuously produce and consume it nonstop. The absolute crucial point here is that the chemical bonds holding those 3 terminal phosphate groups together, that is exactly where the high-stakes energy transfers actually happen. Whenever a cell needs energy, it just breaks off that 3rd phosphate group, turning ATP into ADP, and boom, it releases the exact energy required to do cellular work.
Moving right along to Section 2, the ATP production line.
Now that we know what the currency actually is, let's step into the biological mint and see how it's manufactured. This sequence right here brilliantly illustrates the journey of a single glucose molecule as it's broken down to mint our cellular currency. We start with glycolysis, move into pyruvate oxidation, enter the citric acid cycle, and finish up at the electron transport chain. It's this highly coordinated, multi-step metabolic assembly line that slowly and carefully extracts energy from nutrients rather than just burning it all up at once.
Notice how our production line actually physically moves through the cell. We start out in the cytoplasm for glycolysis, which only gives us a tiny net profit of 2 ATP. But the real magic happens when we transition into the powerhouse, the mitochondria, because that's where the energy yields get progressively more complex. The citric acid cycle runs in the mitochondrial matrix, generating high-energy electron carriers like NADH and FADH2. And then, those carriers travel straight to the inner mitochondrial membrane for the grand finale.
We literally have to slow down for a second here, because this process, which is called chemiosmosis, is just incredibly cool. Those electron carriers drop off their electrons at the electron transport chain. And as the electrons flow through these protein complexes, they actively pump protons across the inner mitochondrial membrane, creating this massive proton gradient. Think of it exactly like water building up behind a giant dam. These flowing protons then physically drive a molecular machine called ATP synthase. It literally spins like a turbine, slamming ADP and phosphate back together to create fresh ATP.
And that brings us to the massive payoff. Modern estimates show that the complete oxidation of just one single glucose molecule yield roughly 30 to 32 ATP in human cells. I mean, that is an unbelievable return on investment. Jumping from just 2 ATP during glycolysis to over 30 once the mitochondria finish the job through oxidative phosphorylation. This biological machinery is so incredibly efficient that your body actually recycles its own body weight in ATP every single day, just to keep you alive. But there is a catch. For this high-yield mitochondrial assembly line to actually run, oxygen absolutely must be waiting at the very end to catch the electrons. If oxygen isn't there to clear the line, the electrons back up, the proton pumping stops, the turbine halts, and your ATP production completely plummets. So when you think about it, this is literally why we breathe. Every breath you take is just you inhaling the final electron acceptors for your cellular production lines.
Which leads us perfectly into Section 3, life without oxygen.
What happens during a supply chain crisis when that crucial oxygen goes missing? Well, remarkably, cells can activate a backup generator, like lactic acid fermentation, to temporarily keep glycolysis running. Say you're sprinting as fast as you can and your muscle cells run out of oxygen. Oxidative phosphorylation shuts down. To survive, your cells quickly convert pyruvate into lactate. This anaerobic process doesn't need oxygen and it stays right there in the cytoplasm.
Not sure. It yields a lot less ATP, but it buys your cells just enough time and energy to keep functioning during an intense, temporary crisis.
Okay, moving to section 4, spending the energy.
So we've seen how the currency is made. Let's talk about how the cell actually spends it. ATP buys us literally everything, from the mechanical detachment of myosin in our muscles to the incredibly energy-demanding process of translating RNA into proteins. If you want to flex your arm, ATP hydrolysis provides the mechanical energy from myosin to detach from actin. If you want to think a thought, ATP powers the sodium-potassium pumps that maintain your neuronal membrane potentials. Even cellular signaling relies on ATP to provide phosphate groups to activate different enzymes. It truly is the ultimate universal biological currency.
But keep in mind, the cellular economy is incredibly tightly regulated. It uses built-in sensors like AMKP to stimulate energy production the absolute second our ATP bank account drops. So when energy demand spikes and ATP levels fall, AMKP acts like a metabolic alarm bell. It instantly senses this imbalance and triggers pathways to restore cellular energy, ensuring that the cell never, ever goes completely bankrupt.
And finally, section 5. When power grids fail. Let's examine the devastating consequences of a metabolic market crash. Abnormal energy metabolism is completely disastrous, and it's heavily linked to severe system-wide conditions, everything from cardiovascular disease to cancer. When the mitochondria are damaged, or the metabolic pathways we've been talking about today are disrupted, the body simply cannot produce enough ATP to sustain normal function, and that cellular failure echoes upward through the whole body.
And because organs like the brain and the heart are the absolute biggest spenders in this economy, they are tragically the very first to suffer when ATP production stalls. Your heart beats continuously, right? And your brain is constantly firing signals. Both of them demand an uninterrupted, massive flow of ATP at all times. Even a brief disruption in oxidative phosphorylation can lead to absolutely devastating neurodegenerative or cardiovascular consequences.
If you take only one thing away from this explainer today, let it be this fundamental truth about how life actually sustains itself. The food we eat is really just the raw material. It is the intricate, microscopic dance of glycolysis, the citric acid cycle, and that beautiful electron transport chain that actually gives us the spark of life.
So I'm going to leave you with this final thought. As researchers dive deeper and deeper into metabolic engineering, how might we eventually fix our own broken power grids? By truly understanding the exact machinery of ATP production, the world of biotechnology is opening doors to optimizing cellular energy, producing biofuels, and perhaps one day completely curing mitochondrial diseases. It is an absolutely fascinating frontier. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the cellular economy.